Hello and welcome to the SPA National Conference, or SPANC 21. My name is Chris Matthews. I'm the London SPA Regional Officer, and I'll be chairing this panel on freelance journalism. Thanks to everyone for joining us this weekend. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We'll have a conversation around the subject, and there'll be time for questions at the end. If you feel comfortable, you can raise your hand digitally on Zoom and we'll unmute you. Or you can just write your question in the chat and I'll read it out. Just so everyone is aware, the panels are being recorded as well as being live streamed and will go up on the SPA YouTube channel. Right, so Caroline Harrap has been a journalist for almost 20 years and freelance for the last 4. Based in Paris, she writes regularly for The Guardian, France Today and Culture Trip, among others, and also edits travel guides. As well as being a co-founder of the Society of Freelance Journalists, she is a mentor for the undergrad journalism course at Birmingham City University. Meehika Barua is an accomplished freelance journalist and speaker writing for Vogue US, The Guardian, British Vogue, Vice, Glamour, The Washington Post, and many more. She covers culture, lifestyle, and social issues, sometimes through the lens of tech and human rights. She was the winner of the Thomason Foundation's Worldwide Journalism Competition in 2018. And finally, Charlie Peters is a journalist, writer and broadcaster from London. His work has appeared in The Telegraph, The Spectator, Mail Plus, National Review and others. He has contributed to several major national and international TV and radio shows. And Charlie has also served on operations with the UK Armed Forces and holds a philosophy degree from Edinburgh University. So welcome to you all. And I'd like to start with each of you telling us your story, how you came to be a freelance journalist. Caroline, would you like to start?
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here and see everyone. I started in local newspapers originally, which I still think is a really fantastic training for a journalist starting out, and then I went on to edit a magazine, a regional magazine called Sorry Life, and then I decided to go freelance 4 years ago, and I love the freedom that comes with freelancing, and all the different opportunities that come with that maybe you don't get so much in a staff role. Yes, that's me.
Brilliant. Charlie, how about you?
I started doing freelance journalism at university for a small magazine some of you might have heard called Spiked. I was very lucky as a student to be able to get involved with, I think you should always write about what you know or what you're involved with, right? So as a student, I wrote often about campus culture and university issues. So I started small there, and within a year or so, I was lucky enough to start writing for The Telegraph. And from then I've built on contacts and opportunities since. My career in journalism hasn't always been freelance, though. I also do full-time work in editorial to have a base in the industry, and I freelance when I can.
Brilliant. And Meehika, how about you?
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you for having me. It's so great to see you all. So I started freelance journalism because I was studying architecture, and I knew I didn't want to be an architect. So I was just figuring out what I want to do. So I was interning in a lot of magazines, and I thought, it's so stressful. I could just do it probably, like at home. So I studied about freelance journalism off the internet, and it's been like that ever since. I was completing my architecture degree and freelancing with magazines on the side. And I think it's the last 2 years that I've been a full-time freelance journalist.
Brilliant. And Caroline and Meehika, you're both more focused on features, while Charlie, you mainly write opinion pieces. I was wondering what each of your processes is. So did you find an idea, research it, and then pitch, or do you pitch first? Charlie, I'll come to you first.
Oh, lucky enough nowadays to often get commissioned, so I'll pitch when I can. But usually, as you say, within my particular area of freelance writing, it's often a reaction within 20 to 48 hours for a national tabloid piece. So it's very often the case that you'll pitch maybe 3 or 4 ideas, and one will hook. But for opinion pieces that aren't necessarily tied to the news, then I'll send them to editors or journalists who are more interested in having a long form conversation with me to develop the piece and develop the ideas. But for for those reactive op-eds, then really it's 24 hours, send a few and hope one lands.
Brilliant. And Meehika, is that a sort of similar process for you, do you think?
I don't do pieces at all which have a time frame of like 40 to 72 hours, because I think that's, for me, very stressful. So for me, all of my features are, something that's evergreen, something that gives me time. And I really admire Charlie, because I could never do that. It's the stress of the fact that this story expires in 72 hours and I have to place it, or it goes away forever. I couldn't deal with it. So yeah, most of it is stuff I pitch. Sometimes I'm assigned stories with editors I've worked with 2 or 3 times. I think that happens a lot with British Road. My editor is like, there's this new show. Would you like to interview, the actress? Or sometimes, she's like, can you write an op-ed on this, which could be like 24 or 48 hours time frame. But when an editor reaches out, that's different. But when I pitch and I know that this story might not be picked up, I just don't see the value in it. So yeah.
Brilliant. And Caroline, I'm going to come to you. What's the process?
So I kind of do a bit of both, mainly features. So with features, as Meehika says, they tend to have a longer time frame. So I tend to put quite a lot of research if I'm going to pitch a feature idea, because obviously a longer form piece, you have to have a sort of a clear narrative and a clear understanding of how that's going to sort of pan out to pitch it to an editor. So if I'm pitching a feature, I'll do quite a lot of research. I do a bit of opinion stuff here and there if it's something I feel sort of comfortable writing about quickly, because as Charlie and Meehika pointed out, the timeframes are very, very short, so it can be quite stressful because you don't get the same amount of time to do your research or interview people or what have you. So if it's a subject I feel comfortable with, then I might pitch on that, but features is more my thing.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I'm going to throw this one out there. Why freelance? Why not work for a company and get a regular income? Meehika, I'm going to go to you.
First of all, office politics, and second of all, everyone's like short-staffed and overburdened. Like editors, they're working until 8 p.m., 9 p.m. I saw that when I was interning at the Times Magazine or T2 Sunday Times Style Magazine, and I don't think it was worth it. I mean, they're short-staffed and the burden is huge. They have to do everything. You can't just be an editor anymore. You have to know how to, call in products. You need to know how to schedule interviews. You have to do everything. It's not just, editing copy. So I think it's just too stressful. And if you have the capacity for it, definitely yes, but go for it. But I think I'm very comfortable freelancing for now. So yeah.
Brilliant. And Charlie, how about you? Because you also do copy editing on the side, is that right?
I probably do writing on the side, copy editing, so I earn a living. But in terms of why freelance, or why I'd prefer to freelance, right, and belong to an organization, firstly, it's due to the editorial positions that certain newspapers and magazines might expect you to take. If you freelance, you can submit a variety of your views to a variety of publications. You're not restricted by what an employer might expect you to write about. Say if you were to, work at a national newspaper which had a particular political leaning, your freedom to write on other issues might be limited. And also, secondly, the expectation of writing when you're full-time, that you have to produce something every 7 days. That, I think, stifles the quality of your performance and also of the strength of your ideas. Now, it might be the case that I'll write 3 or 4 things in a week, and that would be a great week. But I can also go a month where I just read, and then in that month afterwards, I have a million better ideas. But if I'm restricted to being required to write something every week, say on a clockwork pattern, then I'd find that very limiting and destabilizing to the quality of my work.
And Caroline, you made the switch 4 years ago. When did you decide that you wanted to go freelance, and why?
Well, I've been working as either a staff writer or a staff editor for 15 years, and which I did love as well. But I sort of felt in my last job as a commissioning editor that I'd done everything that I could kind of do with that. And what I love about freelancing is that the sky's the limit, really. I mean, it's such a sort of open book. You can choose which publications you want to pitch to, what kind of things you want to write about, when you want to write about them. And it's just lovely to have that freedom. And I think, as Charlie says, it also does help you to be a bit more creative too, with that freedom. That's for me how it is anyway.
Brilliant. And do you ever get lonely though? Do you sort of miss being in a newsroom and having other people to bounce your ideas off? Okay. Caroline, we'll go with you and then go to the others.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And that was one thing when I first went freelance that was a bit of a shock, actually, because I wasn't really expecting that. I was really excited about the idea of working alone in a room with peace and quiet, because some of the places I've worked before have had open plan newsrooms, which sometimes I find a bit disruptive to your concentration. But then, yeah, after a few weeks, I was like, it can feel a bit isolating. So it's really important, I think, to connect with a community, your fellow freelancers. And that's why we set up the Society of Freelance Journalists for that very reason, to sort of bring freelancers together so they can meet and chat with each other online and through Zoom calls and things like that. And that really helps.
Brilliant. And Meehika, what about you?
I think it's, pretty much similar to what Caroline said. I'm a member of the Society of Freelance Journalists as well. And there are a lot of Facebook groups, but I think, the community is very important to have. There's so many things that go wrong in the freelance world, whether it's about invoices, contracts, an editor ghosting you and you need advice. And I think more than, being in a newsroom full of people, I think you need a community you can trust and people who are going to give you, sane advice. So I think in that respect, having a community is very helpful. But I don't think I miss being in a newsroom, because I don't think I could write when so many people are just like screaming and shouting around me. It's so peaceful to just go to a coffee shop and just write, or like do it from my home. So I don't miss that. But I miss the community, yes.
Brilliant. And Charlie, how about you? Especially with the opinion writers, lots of differing perspectives. Do you still manage to hang out with some opinion writers and bounce ideas off each other?
Absolutely. And rather boringly, I'm going to echo what the previous two speakers have said about how important it is to maintain a community with fellow freelancers. And even though I do find that writing is usefully a rather solitary exercise, it's incredibly important to maintain a rather close-knit community of like-minded friends who will openly challenge you before you write, especially in opinion, where you don't want to regret something after you've said it, shall we say. So it's very useful to have people who you can rely on to challenge you and actually just to sit around for 3 or 4 hours and discuss ideas, which is why if you are freelancing, as a writer, especially in opinion, and I know there's been a ginormous shift in working from home recently, of course, which I've benefited from enormously. I still think it's quite important to live in cities where you can meet people in person and enjoy the benefit of interpersonal evaluation with work.
Brilliant. And actually, just following on from that one, often you see pretty horrid comments below articles or directed at journalists online. Is that something you've been on the end of, and how do you deal with it, especially if perhaps you don't have the support of a newsroom or an editor? Meehika, should we start with you?
I think I've never had, I mean, of course, there are like a lot of negative comments, but I don't think I've had a situation that's just like gotten out of hand, or like, you know, I've not received emails. But in those situations, mostly, I think it's best to speak to your editor, and they deploy, you know, their staff to cut back on the comments which are just derogatory and yeah, while I've had a lot of freelance journalists who, yeah, just mentioned this, that they were being threatened online by trolls, and the newsroom takes care of it most of the time. So yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, and Caroline, I can see you nodding there. Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, I mean, last year it happened to me for the first time, and it was a real shock. I wrote a piece about face masks for the Independent, which I thought at the time was a fairly innocuous piece. Actually, it was quite humorous, and oh my gosh, yeah, the backlash from that was really shocking. I had people track down my email address, all my social media handles, and threats because I was advocating the use of face masks. Yeah, so, but exactly as Meehika says, it's really important to if something like that happens, to raise it with your editor, and hopefully you'll be working with a good editor who will support you. The Independent were amazing. They really helped me through the whole process and guided me through what to do and how to sort of lock down my social media and, you know, other stuff. So there are steps that you can take if it does happen, and they were very supportive. But yeah, it's not a fun thing to go through, and sadly I think it is becoming more common.
Yeah, and Charlie, just going to you, have you experienced that at all, or and do you ever engage with people online who are sort of throwing things at you? Well, not literally, but
yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone wants to say something nasty or rude to me about my work, and you know, pick a number, get in line and wait their turn. I often will engage with these people because they, you know, it's a shame, but they do often drive interaction, especially when you're picked on by a big account or a notable journalist who hasn't taken to what you've written. Sometimes it'll be, you know, abuse and something you have to deal with, but often it's actually quite useful and might alert people to your work. I mean, perhaps that's a particularly controversial thing to say, but yeah, and some of the work I've done, some of the best pieces I've done have attracted, you know, hate essentially, and that's been good for me, and it's helped me realize that I've hit on something particularly good when I've had such a stern and angry reaction. But I would recommend to all freelancers, especially those who've got a right opinion, to take a basic online security course. Learn how to protect yourself before you need to. Yeah, don't let silly avenues of approach for bad people to ruin your life.
Nice. Right. So what are your top tips for people starting out in the industry? Obviously, we're talking at the moment to a lot of student journalists on the cusp of their career. Meehika, let's go to you first.
Actually, as a freelance journalist, my top tip would be to try everything. Because that's what worked for me. So I wasn't just like an opinion writer. I wasn't just like, you know, features writer. I did everything: fashion, lifestyle, tech. And that's pretty much what I've been doing now as well, mental health. You know, just branching out in as many beats as you can. I think at this point, as a freelance journalist, I don't think it's profitable to have just one beat. A lot of people do it, but for me, it's been very useful to just be able to write about anything and everything. I've gotten a lot of commissions that way. I've had a lot of editors come back to me with assignments, and I didn't have to pitch much. So yeah, that's my top tip. Just branch out.
Brilliant, thanks. Caroline, what's your top tip?
So I think networking is really, really important, and the great thing about the way everything has sort of gone so much online in the last year or year and a half makes that so much easier. Like I think, you know, there is so much potential to engage with editors in a sort of positive, meaningful way through social media, or maybe attending a Zoom that they're hosting, or a masterclass, or things like that. A lot of publications are hosting masterclasses now. Like National Geographic did some brilliant ones a couple of weeks ago. So I think that's a great way when you're starting out, because it means that when you're ready to pitch, you kind of already got some kind of link with that editor, and you know, they might even remember your name. So I'd say that's very important. And also to quickly say that also I think it's really useful because now it's so easy just to start your own website or your own blog or your own newsletter. So even if you don't have any bylines yet, it's quite easy to sort of get your writing out there and get some pieces sort of in the public domain that you can then show to editors later. So I guess those would be my two top tips.
Brilliant. And Charlie? What are your
three main points for me. Firstly, an incredibly boring one, but enormously useful one nonetheless, which is learn how to use Excel, and use Excel to monitor your invoices. Because if you don't do this, you will forget to get yourself paid, or you will fail to chase up things. And so, yeah, I think Excel is your friend. Secondly, get a mentor. If you are just starting out, try and find someone who is perhaps in a full-time editorial position at a paper or a magazine you're hoping to write for, who might give you some tips themselves and might take you under their wing. That was incredibly useful for me. When I first started writing, I had a couple of deputy editors at the first magazine I wrote for, Spike, who took time out of their time to show me the ropes and give me some advice. And I think more than anything, that has benefited me the most in the long run. And finally, there are lots of people who want to be freelance writers, be it features and opinion, but not many of them have experiences in the real world before they do that. Journalism as a reporter is useful, but if you are going to cover one beat specifically or a couple, it might be useful to have some real world experience before you do that. I mostly nowadays write about security, terrorism, and defense, and it's useful that I have served in the military before doing that. That has given me a certain edge to my writing, and also a level, I think, of credence and respect among editors, that they know I've done the job. It's not just someone else pitching their ideas. Yeah, those are three for me.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, now I'm gonna open up the conversation to everyone watching on Zoom at home. So you can raise your hand digitally or put a question in the chat that we'll read out. And first of all, we're gonna come to Kate, who has asked, do you think you're at a disadvantage if you start out as a freelancer, as opposed to the more traditional route in a newsroom than going independent? Meehika, I can see you're shaking your head, so we'll come to you first.
I never held like a full-time position, but as I said, I started out with interning at these magazines, and then I decided I don't want to do that. So no, I don't think so. You're at a disadvantage. I think you have more leeway to write different stuff for different publications, different topics. You can just do whatever you want. I just, yeah, there are no restrictions on you. As Charlie said as well, like if you're in a, you know, like full-time job at a publication, you can't write stuff that doesn't align with their, you know, ethics or their policy. And that's just, yeah, very sad. So
brilliant. And do you both agree with that, Charlie? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. I think the main advantage to having started out somewhere on a payroll is that the network is already made for you. So if you do eventually leave on, you have a place where you know you had a better chance of getting your work published. But for me, really, that's about it. And so, yeah, the freedom that's afforded to you by being a freelancer is so great that the networking benefit of having a full-time background is blown out of the water for me.
Brilliant. And Caroline, I'm going to come to you with a question from Lauren, who asks, what process do you follow for submitting a pitch, particularly if it's your first time working with an editor or a publication?
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing is if you haven't worked with a publication before, then obviously it makes it really important that your pitch is nicely written and nicely presented in a way that the editor's, going to look at it straight away. And, your pitch is your chance to sell your writing. Having said that, I think it's also really important to keep it really, really brief and succinct. The thing is, the editors are so busy and they get hundreds of emails every day as someone who's commissioned before, and I know this from personal experience. So I would say introduce yourself just very, very briefly at the start, and if you haven't written for them before, then you could just tell them a line about yourself, or perhaps you're based in a certain area and that's relevant to your pitch, or just something that's going to capture their attention. And then just a short summary of your idea and why the story is of value to that publication, sort of why should they put it in their publication, why is it of interest to their readers, and why should that story be told now. And then just finishing off with why you're the person to write that piece. Perhaps you have the contacts, or you've already done the interviews, or you have some lived experience or specialist knowledge. And then if you have them, a few links to your work, or if not, then perhaps you could just share a link to a blog or a newsletter or something. But I wouldn't at all say, if you haven't written before, you don't have any bylines, don't let that hold you back, because it's the idea that's really important. And if you can sell your idea, then an editor will take it, and then they will help you through the process. So yeah, absolutely go for it, I would say.
And Charlie, just on that same point as well, you mentioned you started freelancing when you were at university with Spiked. How did you first get off the ground with a new publication? People?
So I sent them an email. It's as simple as that. I mean, if you are a 18, 19-year-old student, these places aren't going to come to you necessarily. So a lot of it requires just the confidence to believe that your idea is good in the first place, and just get in touch. I completely agree with Caroline that it's about the quality of your idea, not necessarily your background as a writer. So whenever I pitch to a new publication, I'll put one line at the end of my email, just saying, "Oh, I've written for these places in the past. Here are my other bylines." Nothing more than that. And I really have to rely on the quality of my idea to get through to a new publication. And sometimes they'll say, not for us this time, but please do pitch again. And once you've tried, you're halfway through the door. So it's it really is about the quality of idea. Don't worry at all about the fact that you've not written for them before, or that you haven't got New York Times on your byline list. It's fine. Just as long as the idea is good, you're on the way.
Brilliant. And then this is a question from Grace. Meehika, I'm going to come to you with it. How can you increase your self-confidence when you're writing? Grace says she gets quite anxious about her pieces. Is it just something that comes over time, or is there anything you can do?
I think as a writer, you're never going to write like your copy. Sorry. As a writer, you're never going to like your copy. But what you can do is give yourself some time after you've written the piece. Don't look at it for a couple of hours, come back to it, and then edit it. And if you're still feeling unsure, leave it. I mean, of course, that means you need a good time frame. It can't be something that you're sending in like 48 hours or 24. But I think that's how I built confidence, especially when I was writing my pieces. Sometimes I'd swap it with a fellow freelancer. They'd send me their draft, and I'll look at it and give comments, or just fix typos, because sometimes you're writing and you just miss some of the things, whether it's just a punctuation mark, or like a sentence which is awkward, or grammatical issues. There are a lot of things you can do to make sure your draft is clean, and it's very useful. Like, I cannot stress this enough. Like, if you file a clean draft where the editor does not have to fix your punctuation, they don't have to fix your awkward sentences, it's more likely the editor will commission you again, or will come back to you with a second assignment, which has been the case with me. So make sure when you're working with a new editor, just be confident, and also just make sure your draft is clean and nice.
Brilliant, thanks. Caroline, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, just that for me, the anxiety has never gone away. But I try to use that in a positive way. So it kind of makes me, I think, more attentive to the detail, maybe. I mean, I print out all my stuff and I read it like with a fine tooth comb. I also do a fact check after I finish. So I cross check every single fact that I've said again to make sure that I haven't like hopefully screwed anything up. I mean everyone makes mistakes sometimes, everyone's human, but I think if you are like a bit anxious about your work, then that can kind of be a positive thing in a way.
Brilliant. And Charlie, I'm going to ask you the same question, especially as an opinion writer. You're kind of maybe wearing your heart in your sleeve, putting yourself out on the line. Do you get sort of any sort of self-confidence issues, or how do you overcome that?
Well, yeah, there's a natural narcissism revolving around opinion writing, right? You think that I'm going to have this piece commissioned at 12 and I'll write it by 5. And I believe that within 5 hours, I can produce some work that people will be interested in. People will want to hear my opinion, right? So if you aren't going to have a certain degree of self-confidence, that's going to be a struggle. However, it is enormously helpful if you have an editor who gives you good feedback before a reader does straight away. Who lets you know that you've done good work. And that propels you on to the next one. Also, by virtue of having a background in editorial work, that's my main source of income. That's how I earn a living, and that's how I properly stay in the journalistic world. I know that my copy is clean because I edit tens of thousands of words a day, which means that when I edit my own work, my writing quality has improved enormously since I've been doing that for a few years now. So if you can get into any sort of copy editing or sub-editing work, do it, because your writing will improve and that will give you self-confidence in the quality of your work.
Brilliant, thank you. Now we've got a question from Marino, who asks, how do you go about finding publications that fit your pitches best? Caroline, should we start with you?
I think the really important thing is to read as many publications as you can, and then the ones that you decide that you are interested in, just read them and read them and read them again, so that you become really familiar with the style of the publication, all the different sections, what they've already covered before, because that's going to really help inform the pitch that you then make to that publication. So I think that would be the main thing I would say.
Thanks. Meehika, what do you think about this?
I think I'm going to echo the same thing. Read as much as you can, but then again, I also know there are so many magazines and newspapers out there. And when I was young, I was very overwhelmed with it. And I was talking to an editor at Times 2, and I was like, how do I keep track of this? I can't read everything. There's just hundreds of magazines and publications. And she said to me, read what you like reading, because those are the places you want to write for. Do not read, like if you have to force yourself to read a certain magazine or publication just because it's prestigious, you're probably never going to write for them, because if you don't like reading it, I think that kind of like changed my perspective, because I know as a young journalist there's like enormous pressure to just read everything, but I think being very mindful of what you like and what you don't like will help you, because then you'd know what kind of stories you'd want to do, and that's how I realized I don't want to do news, and I don't like writing news pieces. So yeah, there's that. And then there's also Twitter. So following a lot of editors on there who post pitch calls. Then there are newsletters. I think Gem has an amazing newsletter. It's called Journal Resources, if I am not wrong. But yeah, that's also very helpful for young journalists. She posts Twitter calls for pitches over there.
Brilliant, thanks. And Charlie, I'm going to come to you with the same question, just in case you have anything else to add to those brilliant points.
Yes, perhaps this is quite unique, regarding the opinion section, I suppose. But just know the editorial line of where you're going to write for. It's an incredibly basic piece, but don't waste your time pitching to someone which is unlikely to hold the view that you have, especially as I think newspapers are becoming increasingly, or newspapers and magazines are becoming increasingly one-sided in their political persuasion. Don't pitch the wrong idea to the wrong paper.
Brilliant. And Ella has asked, how do you come up with unique ideas? How do you find your stories, especially over the pandemic when there hasn't been much opportunity to have unique real world experience and connections with others to bounce off? Caroline, especially in the travel industry, this must have sort of hit home quite hard. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so for ideas, I think, again, it really helps to read as much as possible in your area of interest, and that can often sort of spark an idea, maybe for a follow-up if a publication is written about something that you're interested in and you think, oh, wow, I have a different angle on that, so reading as much as possible can generate ideas. Subscribing to newsletters around your area of interest, so that you're sort of in the loop for any kind of interesting, newsy, topical hooks in your area of interest. Also, just talking to people, whether that's online with peers, in the community that we were talking about earlier, or with your friends and family. Often, if your friends and family are talking about something, then chances are it's going to be something that might interest a wider group of people. So just talking to as many people as possible and reading as much as possible, for me anyway. Brilliant.
And Meehika, we'll come to you.
Well, I'm at the point where I'm just so tired of finding pandemic hooks to every pitch that I send out, but I think reading is helpful, and also talking to people, talking to just people in your own house, the debates we have with my housemates. Sometimes I churn out stories from that. Also being very mindful what you're thinking about, what you're going through. Like, for example, I wrote about pandemic breakups for Vogue, and how people are finding breakups and relationships very difficult during lockdown, which wasn't particularly a new topic. A lot of other people had covered it before, but I had a different angle because I went through a breakup and I thought, no one's written about this angle. So I pitched that and I was picked up. So I think really being mindful of, what others are doing, as Caroline said, and just seeing if you have a different angle for it. And that's I think that's just a bit.
Brilliant. And Charlie, I'm going to come to you again.
Sure. I think there's no science to coming up with unique ideas, right? Sometimes it either happens or it doesn't. But there are some things that you can do to make that easier. As both the other panelists have mentioned already, obviously read widely and discuss with others. But for me, the best way to come up with a new idea is just to go for a long walk. I find if I'm sat indoors for any longer than about 2 hours, zero good ideas or indeed new ideas will pop into my head. But if I'm outdoors, I'm not stewing inside waiting for something to come to me, and I find that inspiration comes much more readily when I'm outside.
Brilliant, thank you. So I have to say it's raining today, so don't go out walking. Stay here and watch SPA.
I'm a brave boy. Don't worry, I can handle
it. Right, Kate asks, what do you think about writing for free? She's torn between wanting to build up her portfolio and her experience and gain contacts, but also wanting to be paid for her work. Meehika, should we ask you first?
So I think you need to understand when you're being exploited and when someone's giving you a chance. For example, when I was just starting out and I had a couple of bylines under me, I had a meeting with a glamour editor and I had a really good story idea. And this was like 2 or 3 years ago, but she was like, can you write this for us for free? To give you a lot of exposure and blah, blah. And I'm really glad I said no to that, because I placed that story somewhere else and got paid for it. But that's the thing. I had bylines under my belt, and yet because I was young, I was asked to write for free. And I think that distinction is very important to recognize, because a lot of times, yeah, you just be passed as someone who's new, does not know their stuff. But if I was a journalist who had no bylines, of course, like having glamour under my belt would have been, you know, a big deal. But as I said, I think you just need to recognize the distinction. Just probably have, a number in your head, like, okay, I'll do 3 articles for free, no matter what byline it is. But I won't do 10 of them. So having that limit in your head will always just help you to just like recognize that.
Great, thanks. Charlie, how about you? Have you ever written for free?
Yeah, I started out writing for free, and yeah, I'm not going to boringly echo all of Meehika's points. So I'm actually just going to say I agree entirely with what she just said, and to prevent me just repeating everything, yeah, let me just copyright those views as my own as well.
Brilliant. And onto a question from Sammy, actually, who asks, do you subscribe to PR alerts to help with sort of generating and inspiring story ideas? And are there any other resources you could recommend? Caroline, how about you?
Yeah, so definitely sign up to all of those things, but at the same time being a bit mindful that there'll be hundreds, if not thousands, of other journalists also subscribing to those same channels. So if you're going to sort of use something from there, then I would highly recommend contacting the PR in question or the organisation and trying to have a chat with someone so that you can get your own angle on the story or something a bit different, so that you're not just pitching along with other people the same idea. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's great if you can sign up for newsletters, not just industry ones, but ones that are, from a specific charity or a specific organisation or something like that. Sorry, what was the question again?
Sorry, just exactly as you were saying, any other resources you use as a freelance journalist? Any
other resources? Yeah, that's right. Just chatting to other journalists. I mean, in the Society of Freelance Journalists, we have a Slack group, and everyone sort of bounces ideas off each other. And I think it can be just great to chat with your peers about things as well.
Brilliant. Meehika, how about you? Do you use similar resources, or there are other ones you want to mention? You don't have to.
No, I mean, I don't subscribe to PR alerts because the emails are just nonstop. But if I have a specific request, I just post it on Twitter. And yeah, it's the same thing that Caroline said. They are, just being churned out for, a lot of journalists. So everyone's going to be on it. And as a freelancer, I don't think so you're at an advantage. I think it's mostly for people on staff jobs. So.
Brilliant. And there's another question here, which I think will work quite well with you, Meehika. How much research or sort of interviews do you do before you actually pitch an idea?
So when I was starting out, I used to do a lot of it, and then I realized you don't need to pre-report unless your editor asks you a particular question, and then you can probably do some research. But I think your pitch needs to be very brief. So if you've done a lot of research, if you've done a lot of interviews, and it's not picked up anywhere, you are just going to feel very bad. So I try to keep my pitch very brief. I'll link to what people are saying in general, just a basic research, like some news hooks, some stats, but I definitely don't really interview someone for pre-reporting, no.
Okay. And onto a question from Ella, who asks, how important is it to find a specialism as opposed to writing across a broad range of genres? How can you start narrowing it down? Caroline, should we come to you?
Well, I think there's kind of two schools of thought on this. some people are really clear that you should have a niche and it can really help, and other people take the view that it's better to be more of a generalist. What I would say is that I think having some kind of a niche can help you get a foot in the door to certain publications, because you can maybe start off with a smaller trade mag or something like that. Say, I don't know, if you have some kind of interest in environmental matters, and then you kind of get to know your beat really well, and then that makes it easier to pitch to the bigger publications because you already have some kind of, you know, armor in your belt. You've already done a lot of the work, and you can show that you know about your subject. I mean, like for me, I write quite a lot about travel and quite a lot about Paris and France. I don't exclusively write about those things, but it sort of helped get me some good bylines, which then when I want to write about other subjects helps with those. So that's kind of been my experience, but I think it really depends on the kind of journalist you want to be and your interests.
And going to Charlie, you mentioned your experience in the armed forces sort of informs the writing you do. Do you still like to branch into other genres as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes really to the question about research. Especially in my line of writing, it's often that you are opposed to something, or you're taking a response to a news development. So it's very important to, as it were, know your enemy in that scenario, and do an enormous amount of research into the background of what it is that you think is bad. Otherwise, you'll fall up short and be exposed for not really knowing what you're talking about, which wouldn't be particularly good. But also, if I may, I'd like to take a couple of questions back about other resources for freelancers. For me, one of the most important resources has been anonymous Twitter accounts and anonymous newsletters, especially from big industries or big parts of the public sector. It is often the case that you'll get an edge ahead of other journalists if you know what people within, say, the police or the fire brigade or nurses think. If you read what they post anonymously, behind the veil of anonymity, gives you a very, very useful and resourceful insight into the world, which you otherwise wouldn't get if you only went through official press releases or through official news stories from the BBC or whatever. So yeah, try if you can to hunt for anonymous posters, because they will tell you more about the world than Radio 4 will at 6 a.m. So.
Brilliant. And Meehika, do you want to add anything to that or the other questions?
About specialism, right?
Niche.
Yeah.
Specialism.
I mean, I think I've already said it, but for me, it didn't work out. I just wanted to write anything and everything, and it worked out pretty well for me. But there are some topics that you need to have a niche for. For example, I pitched a wine article some time back to this wine publication, and they asked me if I've written about wine before, and luckily I had. But that's what I'm saying. If you are a freelancer and you've never written about, wine and food, you'll need to build it up, your niche, to actually, write for a prestigious wine publication. So I think it's important. I wouldn't stress too much about it, but I think it's important to just see which areas of your life you've had a lot of experience in. For example, I've had an architecture degree, so I think that could be a good niche for me. Writing about interiors and architecture for Charlie, because he said he's been in military. That could be his, his niche could be around that. So I think it's important to see which areas in your life you've had abundance of experience in, but I wouldn't stress too much about it. I wouldn't just go around looking for, oh my God, I need a niche. What should my niche be? Because I've been through that and it gets very stressful. So just let it happen organically. See which issues you care about, which issues you've identified with in the past with your experience. So yeah, that should be helpful.
Brilliant. And I can see we're drawing to a close, but just before we finish, I'm going to let Jem Collins do a little shout out for the 1-to-1 later. Jem, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry for hijacking really quickly. Just to say, we've had one dropout at our one-to-one session at 2:20 this afternoon. So if anyone is free at 2:20 and would like the chance to speak to a journalist one-on-one to ask any questions you have about a career in journalism, if you just drop me an email, I'm going to put it in the Slack now. It's just gem@spajournalism.com, and we'll try and get that assigned to someone else.
Brilliant. Cheers. Right, there we are. We have reached the end of the session. Thank you so much to all our panelists. It's been a brilliant discussion, and it's been great to hear your experience, your views, and thank you to everyone watching at home as well. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, feel free to tweet us at SPA Journalism on Twitter. Also, upcoming, we've got Alison Phillips in Room 1 and LGBTQ+A panel in Room 2. So go watch them. They'll be fantastic, just as this one was, hopefully. And thank you to everyone. Cheers.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.